Exodus 15. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has hurled into the sea. The best of Pharaoh's officers are drowned in the Red Sea. The deep waters have covered them. They sank to the depths like a stone. Your right hand, Lord, was majestic in power. Your right hand, Lord, shattered the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you threw down those who opposed you. You unleashed your burning anger. It consumed them like stubble. By the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The surging waters stood up like a wall. The deep waters congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy boasted, I will pursue, I will overtake them. I will divide the spoils. I will gorge myself on them. I will draw my sword, and my hand will destroy them. But you blew with your breath, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders? You stretch out your right hand, and the earth swallows your enemies. In your unfailing love you will lead the people you have redeemed. In your strength you will guide them to your holy dwelling. The nations will hear and tremble. Anguish will grip the people of Philistia. The chiefs of Edom will be terrified. The leaders of Moab will be seized with trembling. The people of Canaan will melt away. Terror and dread will fall on them. By the power of your arm they will be as still as a stone, until your people pass by, Lord, until the people you bought pass by. You will bring them in and plant them on the mountain of your inheritance, the place, Lord, you made for your dwelling, the sanctuary, Lord, your hands established. The Lord reigns forever and ever. When Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen went into the sea, the Lord brought the waters of the sea back over them, but the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. Then Miriam, the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her with timbrels and dancing. Miriam sang to them, Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver has hurled into the sea. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, What are we to drink? Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. There the Lord issued a ruling and instruction for them, and put them to the test. He said, If you listen carefully to the Lord your God, and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water.
Now the song we have here is sometimes called the Song of Moses. The NIV, the title is not part of the Bible, but the editor of the Bible you're reading, some Bibles would put the Song of Moses, some Bibles put the Song of Moses and Miriam. And the Hebrew people who read the Bible in its original Hebrew, they call it the Song of the Sea. It's a song about the Red Sea, more specifically what happened at the Red Sea. And what happened at the Red Sea was the armies of Egypt chased Israel Israel went across on dry ground, and the waters came back and drowned all the armies of Egypt. So this is a song about God's deliverance from the enemies of God. But the focus here is actually not deliverance. The focus here is on God the warrior. God is the warrior. God has won the victory over his enemies. So the whole song really is a focus on God who delivers, but the emphasis is on God the warrior who has destroyed and conquered an enemy. So you see this emphasis again and again. Verse 1, verses 3 and 4, verses 5, 6, 7, 8, verse 10, verse 12. This emphasis that God is a warrior, God fought, God has conquered the chariots of Egypt. Now this first part until verse 18, verses 1 to 18, in the Hebrew is a poem. It is poetry. The NIV, the New International Version of the Bible, tries to indicate that this is a poetry by giving it a lot of space. So you can see suddenly your Bible has a lot of space here. That is because it's supposed to be poetry. And now you would then look at it and say, but there are no rhymes. When you look at English poetry, there's always rhyme, right? Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Yeah. So there's a rhyme. But even then, sometimes English poetry doesn't have a rhyme. Shakespeare's plays are all written in poetry, but the poetry is written in what they call meters. They count the syllable. Yeah. Sometimes it happens also to be rhyming, but not always. So in Macbeth, when shall we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain? When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. So you see a rhyme, but you also, when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. There's a meter, there's a beat. All right, so that's poetry. Different cultures have different ways of denoting poetry. Right? Chinese poetry can sometimes rhyme a little bit. Famous one, right? 床前明月光，疑是地上霜. There's a rhyme. 举头望明月，低头思故乡. So that one has actually the number of words. It's just like another one. 松下问童子，松下问童子 ，5 words. 松下问童子，原是材料器，只在此山中，云深不知处。So it's 5 words, 5 words, 5 words, 5 words. Okay, that's Chinese poetry. Japanese poetry. You've got haiku. Haiku is 5, 7, 5, right? So, Fuji no kaze. Fuji no kaze. 5. Kaseya actually. And Ogini no sete. Edo miyage. 5, 7, 5. This is a haiku from Russia.
Do you understand? Is it right?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Okay. The wind of Mount Fuji is blowing. Fuji no kaze. Yeah, Ogini no sete. I have a fan, and it reminds me of Edo. Edo is only for Tokyo. Edo miyage. So that's 5, 7, 5. Poetry, Japanese poetry. So you have different traditions for poetry, but Hebrew poetry is not like what you have seen. Chinese poetry, syllables, and English poetry, rhyme. Hebrew poetry has parallelism. Okay? Parallels. What does that mean? If you look at this poem here, if you look at, for example, verse 2, the second part of verse 2, there are couplets. Okay, there are two sentences. So the couplet is, He is my God and I will praise Him. And the response is, my Father's God and I will exalt Him. It's parallel. It's the same meaning. mentioned in slightly different words. Let me give you another clearer example. If you look at verse 6, is it? That's right. Your right hand, Lord, was majestic in power. Your right hand, Lord, shattered the enemy. So here's slightly different idea, but it's related. To be able to shatter his enemy, God is powerful. So your right hand is majestic in power. Your right hand shattered the enemy. So that's another parallel. So you get the idea that these are different ideas. They say the same way. Verse 17, for example, you will bring them in and plant them where? On the mountain of inheritance. Where again? The place where you make your dwelling. Where again? The sanctuary, Lord, where your hands established. Parallel, parallel, parallel. Okay, so that's Hebrew poetry. Verse 11, who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders, parallel, parallel, parallel. God is awesome, God is majestic, God is wonderful. Okay, now, so having learned a little bit about Hebrew poetry, I want you to understand why I focus on that. And the reason is when we interpret the Bible, we read the Bible, we need to know that when it comes to poetry, we have to be a bit more careful in interpreting poetry. Why? Just thinking of English poetry. Why do you think you don't read English poetry the same way as you read the novels of Stephen King? I don't think Stephen King writes poetry, but supposing he does, how would you read it differently? Why do you read it differently? Symbolism, symbols, metaphorical language. The sun rises in the east doesn't mean it's unscientific, right? Because we know that the sun doesn't rise. It's the earth spinning. So, but when a poet looks out and see a beautiful sunrise, he says the sun is rising. It doesn't mean he's not a scientist. He just doesn't care about science at that moment, right? He's describing the beauty he sees. Your eyes are like diamonds. Your heart like gold. Oh, yeah, beautiful poetry, yeah? And then what? You say my heart is very hot. So can you imagine that you're praising your girlfriend, your heart is like gold, and she slaps you, right? Because you say my heart is very hot, gold is hot. Yeah. Wrong interpretation, yeah? Yeah, because poetry means the heart is golden, it's beautiful, it's valuable, not because it's hot like gold. So we don't want to misinterpret the Bible and say, okay, why is it like this? So generally speaking, therefore, we don't interpret poems literally. We try and see if maybe there is a meaning behind the meaning, the words that we see. Okay, but before we go deeper into looking at poetry, and actually these are the same rules you do for any kind of poetry, understand that the Bible is written with different kinds of what they call genre. Okay, a genre is a category of literature. So poetry is a genre, narrative, a novel is a genre. So there are stories in the Bible that are novellas, small little novels. The story of Joseph is a novella from Genesis chapter 27 to Genesis 50, a small little novel, a novella. So you have genres like poetry, that's 15. You have genres like narrative, which is verse 19 onwards to the end of chapter 15. Verse 19, the narrative starts. There is prophecy. So if you look at Exodus 15, verses 15 and 16 will be prophecy. It predicts the future. Israel has just come out of Egypt, just crossed the Red Sea, but the poet is already talking about conquering Canaan. It's in the future. Okay, so it's a prophecy. And you have in the Old Testament also something called the wisdom writings. The wisdom writings are books the 5 books beginning with Job, Psalms, Proverbs. What's the next book? Ecclesiastes. What's the next book? Song of Songs or Song of Solomon. Okay, Song of Songs or Song of Solomon. So 5 books: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. These 5 books are called the wisdom writings. And why are they called wisdom writings?
Advice of daily living.
A lot of wisdom. They give a lot of advice and wisdom. And many of them are poems. Okay? Psalms are poems. Some of the Proverbs, some of Ecclesiastes. The Song of Songs is a song, is a poem. So when you read the wisdom writings, you also have to be very careful that you don't read them literally. When you read prophecy, usually they are also written in poetry, so you don't read it literally. They're usually symbolic and metaphorical. So these are the different genres, and when you read narrative, of course, when you read narrative, you try to be as literal as possible. This is a story, you want to read it literally. You want to understand it literally. Okay? So when a novelist writes, and the heart of the mountain was full of gold, you want to read it? No, it doesn't mean that the mountain is romantic. Heart of the mountain here literally is golden. It's got gold inside. It's a gold mine. Okay, kind of like the Hobbit, yeah? So literally there will be gold in that case because you're reading a novel. Now, so back to the points about Hebrew poetry or any kind of poetry. First of all, you do have literal passages. Okay, if you look at verse 5, it's literal, right? Because it talks about what actually happened. The deep waters covered the Egyptians and they sank to the bottom like stone. That's literal. Nothing symbolic about that. It actually happened. If you look, however, at something like 15, verse 1, hurled. Horse and driver hurled into the sea. Verse 4, Pharaoh's chariots and his army hurled into the sea. But how can God, who is spirit, be physically throwing them? Obviously God didn't pick them up and throw them physically, right? What happened in chapter 14 verse 23 will tell us that was a narrative, so we read it literally. Chapter 14 verse 23 says, Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. Nobody threw them. And then in verse 28, the water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea, not one of them survived. So they all drowned. So that was the literal description of what happened. It's narrative. Now the poetry is God hurled them. Symbolic language, metaphorical language. It was as if God had thrown them like a piece of stone, like a ball. Right? So it's symbolic. Another example of symbolic language, verse 17. God, this is the description of God. You will bring them, the Israelites, you will bring them in and plant them. Well, people cannot be planted like plants with roots and all that. But when you take one person from Shandong, China and put her in Toronto, you plant her from one country to another. Yeah, in that sense, metaphorical, symbolic and metaphorical. So when God brings them in and plants them on the mountain of your inheritance, the place of your dwelling, the sanctuary your hands established, God doesn't need a place to live in. God lives in the whole universe. He is everywhere. But the poet is describing a future where he sees God's temple on the mountain of Jerusalem, and there all the people of the world will go and visit. So he sees something in the future. It's a dream, it's a vision, it's a picture, and it's a metaphorical picture, so to speak. Now, if you look at verse 8 and verse 10 of chapter 15. Verse 8 talks about the blast of your nostrils. God doesn't have nostrils. He doesn't even have a nose. The blast of the nostrils. And verse 10, you blew with your breath and the sea covered them. God.
These are the winds.
Yeah, so if you look at chapter 14 again, verses 21 to 22, that's the narrative, that's the literal one. What does it say? Chapter 14, 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind. God sent the wind, and the poet says it's like his nostril, he blew. He doesn't even need to blow with his mouth. Right? It's just his nostril, which is weaker for us. It's weaker air, right? But even his weak air is very strong, right? So yeah, can you imagine that? Yeah, it is. It's the east wind. So it's poetry, right? But 14 is the literal narrative. Okay. Now, verse 1 and verse 4, when you talk about God hurling the Egyptians, there's another figure of speech. We call it hyperbole. Hyperbole, right? What is hyperbole? It means exaggeration. Hyperbole, exaggeration. You instead of saying a forceful wind, you say a blast, right? Or maybe explosion. So it's bigger than actually it was, right? So if I just like that, I say, that was an explosion. Oh, okay, that's hyperbole. Hyperbole, exaggeration. Now there is another figure of speech here in this song. It's called anthropomorphism. Very long word. The root is anthropos. Anthropos means is a Greek word for man. Man. Okay? So God described like a human being is anthropomorphism. God described like a human being. He's got nostrils, he's got hands, his right hand, his left hand, he's got wings. About wings, human beings don't have. But you know, when you talk about the hands of God, the legs of God, the breath of God, and so on, these are anthropomorphisms. Okay, and so you read it and you don't say, oh, so God has a body. Oh, God has hands. Yeah, you're not supposed to read it literally. So, same thing, God does not have a house, he doesn't need a house. But there is an anthropomorphism in verse 17. We talk about the house of God, the dwelling of God. There are word pictures, verse 8. Instead of simply saying, as in chapter 14, that there was a wall of water, here the poet says the waters congealed, it's solidified. Okay, in chapter 14 verse 22, the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on the right and on the left. That's the literal narrative. But in the poem, the poet says the left and the left and the right, the waters congealed. Congealed, yeah, verse 8. The surging water stood up. So you can imagine the water in this picture. The water is lying flat like that and suddenly the water stand up. It's a word picture. And it's solid. It's not flowing. So it's congealed. Okay, like blood that has solidified. So these are word pictures, and obviously when you see a word picture, you can imagine the scenery a little bit better. And then there's another poetic technique in verse 11. For those of you who have studied a little bit of literature, can you tell me what's the poetical device there, verse 11? Begins with R.
Freedom.
Yeah. It comes from the word rhetoric. It's a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question is a question that doesn't need an answer. The answer is obvious from the question. Is this my house? Are you in my house? Are you Stella's son? Are you Raymond's mother? A rhetorical question does not need an answer. The answer is in a question. So who is like God? Nobody. Nobody. Right? Who is like God? Who is like you, God? With a majestic hand and the power and all that? Of course, nobody. Who among the gods is like you? Who is like you? Majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders? Obviously, nobody. Okay, so that's a rhetorical question, and that is a question that supplies its own answer. So, when you read poetry, therefore, you look at the overall picture, the overall message, not the literal message. The literal message may sometimes look very fanciful. And that's why some modern people reading the Old Testament, they say, oh, this is too fanciful. I don't believe in it. It's too magical, too fanciful. But then when you're reading a passage as Exodus 15, it's a song, it's a poem. It means that we don't read it literally. We want to see what's the deeper message. And the deeper message here is, like I said, the focus, God has won a victory. It's like God is a warrior, God is a soldier, and He's battled the soldiers of Egypt and vanquished them, conquered them. So that's the deeper message, that God can be trusted because God is powerful and nobody can protect us like God does. That's the ultimate message. Okay. Now, the other problem that people have when they read the Bible and they don't realize that it is poetry is then they give too much meaning to the passage. Okay? So one of the problems therefore with reading prophecy, Ezekiel and Daniel talks about the future. Chapter 7 and chapter 8 has got visions. We are told dream of Daniel and vision of Daniel. Alright? Chapter 7 is a dream, chapter 8 is a vision. And so in chapter 7, Daniel describes his dream. Verse 2, Daniel said, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven, four great beasts, and then there was a lion, there was an eagle, and so on and so forth. And it is all very fanciful. Then in verse 15, I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit. And then he approached one of the angels, and the angels explained the meaning of the dream to him. Okay, and then chapter 8, the same thing. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision after the one that had already appeared to me. And in my vision, I saw myself, and then he describes this vision, right? And it's about a ram, it's about a horn, and they're fighting each other. And then verse 15, while I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man. This is an angel, and the angel explains to him, Daniel, this is the meaning of your vision. The ram is, verse 20, the two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. And then verse 21, the shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between his eyes is the first king of Greece. So when you have a vision, it is just so fanciful, spectacular. And then there is an interpretation by the angel. Unfortunately, there are parts of the Bible where there is a vision and a dream and a prophecy, but there isn't any angel explaining it. So the problem then is we who are reading it as human beings, we have to try and explain it. And you could give something too much meaning. Okay, let me give you another illustration of how we can give something too much meaning. And if you turn with me to Luke chapter 19. The parable of the 10 minas. A parable is a story. And Jesus used a lot of parables to tell stories, to teach. In verse 13, he called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 minas each. So then he says, put this to work until I come back. So here is a story of a king who left his kingdom and he gave his servants 10 minas each. Now, when he came back, verse 16, the first one came and said, "Sir, your mina has earned 10 more." And 17, "Well done, my good servant." His master replied, "Because you've been trustworthy in a very small matter, take charge of 10 cities. Now, there are people who then try and look at this story of Jesus and try and look into the history of the Roman Empire and try to look for a king who actually gave away 10 cities or 10 kingdoms. And that's not the point. It's over-reading the passage. The passage is about Jesus saying, when you have God giving you talents, you have to use them and you are not to misuse them. And you shouldn't be over-reading the passage by trying to look into history of the Roman Empire and look for a king who actually gave away 10 cities and all that. Or another example is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And Jesus says there was this man who was injured, and the Good Samaritan came along and brought him to an inn. And after he had given the innkeeper money to take care of the Good Samaritan, after the injured person, to take care of him and heal him and so on, we are told Jesus, one of the details of the story is Jesus gave, the Good Samaritan gave the innkeeper 2 coins. And I have heard people preach and say, and the 2 coins represent, the Good Samaritan represents Jesus, and the 2 coins represent the Old Testament and New Testament.
Many Pentecost church day.
Yeah. So that's called over-reading, okay?
Everything has a meaning.
Everything has a meaning? No. It's over-reading. Not everything in a poetry or a story like this, a parable, has a meaning. There is a broad picture. And the broad picture of the Good Samaritan is simply love your neighbor as yourself. That's it. 1 point. No more. Don't look in the Old Testament, New Testament. The innkeeper represents the apostles, and so Jesus gave the 2 coins to the apostles. Over-reading, okay? Right. So back to this passage here. Don't overread. This is simply a song, and a song describing what has happened to Israel.